Maribel Bell watched Walter Pike walk into that church and marry another woman while she was still standing in the street holding the letter he had written her. "Come west, Maribel. I have built something here. I have built it for us." She had sold her good winter coat to pay for the journey. She had told her family goodbye. She had 37 cents in her pocket and a carpet bag at her feet, and every soul in Willow Bend was watching her, and not one of them moved. So she picked up her bag, lifted her chin, and started walking. She did not know where. She only knew she would not fall apart where they could watch. If that opening hit you somewhere deep, you are exactly who this story was made for. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that bell because this story has 5 parts, and you do not want to miss what happens next. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Maribel's story travels. Now stay with me, because it is about to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. The stagecoach had barely stopped rolling when the man at the general store told her. She had walked in with Walter's letter still in her hand, asked where she could find him, and watched the man's face do the thing faces do when they are about to deliver news they would rather not deliver. "Walter got married this morning," he said. "Dora Haynes. Haynes family owns the water rights on the east side of the valley." Maribel set her carpet bag on the floor. She folded the letter once very carefully along the crease that was already there from all the times she had folded and unfolded it over the past 3 months. She put it in her coat pocket. "Thank you," she said. She picked up her bag and walked out. She stood on the wooden sidewalk and looked at the church at the end of the street. Fresh white paint. The smell of linseed oil on the cold air. He was in there right now. In there with a woman who had water rights and a family name that meant something in this valley, and Maribel Bell was out here with 37 cents and nowhere to sleep, and a coat that wasn't warm enough because she had sold her good one to pay for the journey west. Thomas had told her to sell it. Montana winters are different, he'd said. You'll need different things when you're settled. She pressed that thought flat and kept her eyes on the church. She had told her family she was leaving for good. Her father had sold the farm the previous spring. Her mother had moved in with her sister in Harrisburg. There was no going back, not to any of it, and Thomas had known that when he encouraged her to come. Thomas had arranged the whole correspondence. Thomas had introduced her to Walter in the first place. She was not going to think about Thomas right now. She sat down on the edge of the sidewalk, not gracefully, but she sat and she pressed her hands flat on her thighs and breathed. She looked at the dirt street and thought with extraordinary clarity, someone is going to have to do something, and there is no one here but you. That was when she heard the horse pull up. She looked up. The man in the saddle was past 40, dark-haired, going gray at the temples with a jaw that looked like it had been set hard a long time ago and never fully released. Dark coat, worn vest, a hat that had seen enough weather to know better than to complain about it. He was looking down at her with an expression that was not pity and not contempt, and was not quite anything she had a name for. "You all right, ma'am?" he said. "I'm fine," she said. "You're sitting in the street." "I'm sitting on the sidewalk." Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but related to one. "Fair point," he said. He didn't look away. Most people looked away. "You come in on the afternoon coach?" "Yes." "Waiting on someone?" She held his eyes. "Not anymore." He sat with that, looked down the street toward the church, then back at her. He was a man who measured his words before he spent them, and she could see him doing it. "Caleb Rusk," he said. "I run the ranch about 4 miles north." Maribel Bell. She did not stand up. Her feet hurt and she was exhausted, and she had just had the worst hour of her life, and she was not going to perform propriety for a stranger on a horse. He seemed to understand that. He touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Bell, you got somewhere to sleep tonight." "I'm working on it. Willow Bend's got one boarding house. Mrs. Holt's place, far end of town. She requires payment in advance." "I know how boarding houses work," Maribel said. "Yes, ma'am." He adjusted something on his saddle, a small, deliberate motion buying time. "Mrs. Holt is also Walter Pike's aunt." Maribel closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. Caleb Rusk was still there, still watching her with that expression she couldn't name. "My ranch house hasn't had a cook since spring," he said. "My father isn't eating right. I'm not in a position to fix that myself. I'm offering room and board and $2 a week for honest work, cooking, cleaning, keeping the house running." He paused. "It's not charity, it's a job." She looked at him for a long moment. She was looking for the underneath of the offer, the angle, the assumption, the cost that wasn't named. She had spent 34 years learning to look for that. She didn't find it. Which did not mean it wasn't there. But she had 37 cents, and nowhere to sleep. And a woman named Dora Haynes was in a church at the end of this street, wearing something that had been meant for her, and Maribel Bell had not come all this way to sleep in a ditch. "I'll need my own room," she said. "Room off the kitchen, private, has a lock. I'll need Sundays." "That's fine. And I want it understood I am an employee, not a charity case, not a dependent, an employee." He met her eyes without flinching. "Understood." She stood up. It took a moment, her knees protested, and she did it without asking for help. He did not offer any. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. "All right, Mr. Rusk," she said. "Show me what needs doing." The ranch house was large enough to have once been full. She felt that the moment she stepped through the door, that particular emptiness that settles into a house not from absence of furniture, but from absence of life. She had grown up in a house like this after her mother stopped singing. She recognized it the way you recognize an old scar. Caleb's father was sitting at the kitchen table. Small man, older than she'd expected, white-haired, with hands that had done 40 years of hard work, and were now folded in his lap with nowhere to go. He looked up at her without surprise. "Papa?" Caleb said, "This is Miss Bell. She'll be helping with the house." "Silas Rusk," the old man said. He looked at her with clear eyes, no social performance in them, seeing exactly what was there. "You look tired," he said. "I've had a long day," she said. "Sit down then." She sat because he asked her to, and because she was tired past the point of argument. Caleb moved to the stove, lighting it, setting the kettle on, and she looked around the kitchen while he worked. 2 pans where there should have been 6. Salt crock nearly empty. Bread tin empty. A pot on the back of the stove that had been sitting there for days. She got up, lifted the lid, looked inside. "What is this?" she asked. "Bean soup," Caleb said. "When did you make it?" A pause. 3 days ago." She set the lid back down. "I'm starting supper," she said. "Where are your dry goods?" He showed her. While he stood in the doorway watching, she took stock fast and efficient: flour, salt, dried beans, cornmeal, a side of smoked bacon in the larder, root vegetables, still firm enough to use a Dutch oven on the lower shelf, that was well seasoned and hadn't been touched in months. She pulled it out and set it on the stove and got to work. She didn't explain herself. She didn't narrate what she was doing. She just worked the way she always worked when everything else was undone, her hands moving through familiar motions while the raw, furious, humiliated part of her stayed quiet and waited for a time when she could afford to feel it. Caleb watched her for a few minutes, and then she heard him say quietly, "I'll be outside if you need anything." And his boots crossed the floor, and the door opened and closed. Good. She worked better alone. Silas stayed at the table. "You're not what he said you were," the old man said after a while. She didn't look up from the pot. "What did he say I was?" "He didn't say much, just that he'd found a woman in town who needed work." A pause. "But he said it like it mattered. Caleb doesn't say things like they matter unless they do." Maribel stirred the pot. "I needed work," she said. "That part's accurate." "You needed more than work," Silas said. "I can see that, but you're not going to tell me about it." "No," she said. "Not tonight." "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My wife used to say the best thing a person can do when the world's gone sideways is feed somebody. Said it was the one thing that was always true." Maribel looked at him then. He was watching the pot with an expression she recognized, the particular look of someone who is thinking of a person they can no longer reach. "She sounds like she was a wise woman," Maribel said. "She was the best person I ever knew," Silas said simply. He looked at his hands. "Caleb's been carrying it hard. She's been gone 4 years, and he doesn't let much in anymore. keeps the ranch running, keeps me fed more or less. But there's a difference between keeping something running and keeping it alive." He looked up. "You understand what I mean." She understood exactly what he meant. She had lived in the difference between those two things for most of her adult life. "I understand," she said. When Caleb came back inside, the stew was ready. She had set the table bowls, spoons, a cloth that needed ironing, but was clean pan bread warm from the oven. She stepped back and looked at it and thought, "This is something. This is a start." Caleb stopped in the doorway. He stood there a moment without speaking, taking in the table the food the cloth laid out. Then he reached up and took his hat off. The motion was unconscious, the kind of thing a man does without deciding to, and she thought it meant something, though she couldn't have said exactly what. "Supper's ready," she said. She helped Silas to the table, a steadying hand, nothing more, and served them both and sat down herself because she had cooked it and she was hungry and she was not going to stand at the stove watching them eat like she was something less than a person at a table. Silas ate 3 spoonfuls. Then he stopped. He looked at his bowl. Something moved in his face, something that had been locked for a very long time, shifting slightly in its frame. "Eleanor used to put sage in the stew," he said, very quietly. Caleb went completely still across the table. "That's sage," Maribel said. "I found it dried near the window." "Did you know?" Silas asked. "When you used it?" "No," she said. "I just used what was there." The old man looked at his bowl for a long moment. Then he picked up his spoon and kept eating. Caleb did not look at Maribel for the rest of the meal, but she watched him look at his father twice, and both times his jaw worked slightly, like he was pressing something back that had not had anywhere to go in a very long time. After supper, after the dishes were done, and Silas had gone to bed, Maribel sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and finally let herself feel briefly in controlled doses what she had held back all evening. The street. Walter in the church. 37 cents. The winter coat she had sold because Thomas told her to. Thomas, who had introduced her to Walter. Thomas, who had arranged every letter, every promise, every step of the journey west. Thomas, who had known their father was going to sell the farm. Who had known there was no going back. Who had encouraged her to sell everything, tell everyone goodbye and come. She pressed her hands flat on the table. From the front room, she heard Caleb, the sound of boots. A chair, the quiet movements of a man unwilling to go to sleep. She didn't call out to him. She didn't need anything from him tonight. What she needed was to sit very still and feel the shape of what she was beginning to understand, because it was darker than she had wanted to believe, and it had a name on it, and the name was her brother's. She finished her tea. She went to bed. She lay in the dark in a room with a lock on the door, and she stared at the ceiling, and she thought about the letter. "Come, West, Maribel. I have built something here." She thought about the timing of it, how quickly it had come after Thomas's visit. How precisely it had arrived when she had no other options. How Walter had been so specific about what she should bring and what she should leave behind. How Thomas had been so specific. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. In the morning she was up first, stove-lit coffee on biscuits in the pan, before she heard Caleb's boots on the stairs. He came in and stopped that same brief involuntary pause at what he found, and sat down, and she put coffee in front of him without asking how he took it, because she'd watched him pour from the pot the night before. He drank half the cup. "You don't have to start this early. Biscuits need heat," she said, and I was awake. He looked at her over the rim. "You want to talk about any of it?" "No," she said. "I want to talk about the pantry. You're low on salt and out of lard, and I need a small advance to go to the store." Something moved in his expression, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. "I can take you this afternoon. I've got business at the hardware." "I can go alone." "I know you can." She looked at him. He looked at her. "All right," she said. "We'll go together." Silas appeared in the doorway, without either of them having heard him on the stairs. He looked at the table, at Maribel, at the biscuits. "She made the stew," he said. Caleb looked up at his father. Last night, Silas said. He was looking at Maribel with an expression that was careful and specific. You made the stew. You made it the way Eleanor made it. I used what was in the kitchen, she said. I know, he said. That's the thing. He came to the table and sat down, and she put a plate in front of him. He picked up a biscuit and looked at it and then looked at her. You're going to stay, he said. Not a question. As long as the arrangement is fair, she said. It'll be fair, Caleb said. He said it without hesitation, and he was looking at her when he said it, and she believed him. And the fact that she believed him after everything the last 24 hours had taught her about believing men was something she would think about later. Much later. The trip to town that afternoon was the first time she rode through Willow Bend as something other than a woman abandoned in the street. She sat on the wagon seat beside Caleb and looked straight ahead, and she felt the town recalibrate around her, which was not the same as the town accepting her, but it was a different thing than the morning before. She was at the counter in the general store when the door opened and she heard the voice bright. One note too bright, the pitch of someone performing a composure they were not entirely feeling. Caleb Rusk, I didn't know you were coming to town. Maribel did not turn around. She watched Henderson's face do something complicated and kept her attention on the counter. Afternoon, Dora, Caleb said. Flat. Courteous. Nothing else. And who is this? Miss Bell, she's working at the ranch house. Maribel turned around then because she would not be discussed as though she were not in the room. She looked at Dora Pike directly. Young, fine-featured, a good dress, everything about her saying plainly that she had gotten what she had come for, and she held her eyes without blinking. Miss Bell? Dora's voice shifted slightly, careful now, reading something in Maribel's expression that told her to be careful. I believe you came expecting to... I came expecting one thing and found another, Maribel said. That happens. I wish you well in your marriage, Mrs. Pike. She turned back to the counter. The silence behind her lasted long enough to say everything neither of them was going to say out loud. Then the door opened and closed. Henderson cleared his throat. $1.40, Miss Bell. Thank you, she said. Outside at the wagon, Caleb watched her load the parcels without offering to help, and she appreciated that the way she kept appreciating small things about him that she had not expected. You didn't have to do that, he said. No, she said. But I find it's cleaner in the long run. People know where they are with me. Where are you with me? He asked. She looked at him. You offered me work when I had nothing. You were straight about what it was. You didn't treat me like a problem. She handed him the last parcel. I'm square with you, Mr. Rusk. As long as that holds, we'll be fine. It'll hold, he said. She climbed up onto the wagon seat and looked north up the road toward the ranch. She believed him again. She noticed that she believed him again, and she set it aside to examine later the same way she was setting aside everything about Thomas. Everything about the letter. Everything about the precise and deliberate way her life had been arranged and dismantled by people who were supposed to love her. There would be time for all of it. She would need to be steady when that time came. She looked at the road ahead and kept her hands folded in her lap and breathed. And in the pocket of her coat, Walter Pike's letter pressed against her side with every movement of the wagon, and the words she hadn't let herself read again yet sat there in the dark of her pocket like something waiting to detonate. Come west, Maribel. I have built something here. I have built it for us. He hadn't built it for them at all. The question that was going to keep her awake tonight, and the night after, and the night after that, was whether Thomas had known that from the very beginning. She already knew the answer. She just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Maribel had been at the Rusk Ranch 11 days when the first letter arrived from Thomas. She knew it was from him before she opened it. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope, the particular way he formed his capital letters, slightly too large, the way their father had always said, showed a man who thought more of himself than the situation warranted. She had grown up watching that handwriting on birthday cards and holiday greetings, and the occasional note slipped under her door when he wanted something from her. She knew it the way you know the sound of a door that has always stuck. She set it on the kitchen table and finished washing the breakfast dishes before she opened it. Silas was watching her from his chair by the window. He had taken to sitting there in the mornings since she'd arrived, not doing much, just existing in the kitchen in a way he apparently hadn't done in years. Caleb had told her that briefly the night before. He used to stay in his room until noon, he'd said. Just that, nothing more, and then he'd gone back to whatever he was reading, but she had heard what was underneath it. She dried her hands and picked up the letter and opened it. Thomas wrote the way he talked, smooth, confident, every word placed where it would do the most work for him. He asked how she was settling in. He said he hoped Montana was treating her well. He said he was glad she had found a situation because he had been worried about her alone out there. He said Walter Pike was a complicated man, and that he hoped she understood that sometimes these things didn't work out the way anyone intended. He did not apologize. He did not explain. He asked at the end whether she might be able to send him the $20 she had borrowed from him 2 years ago for their mother's doctor bills. He said he hated to bring it up, but times were tight. Maribel read the letter twice. Then she folded it along its creases and set it on the table and looked at it for a moment. "Bad news," Silas said. "My brother," she said. "Ah." The old man was quiet for a moment. "The one who introduced you to Pike." She looked at him. "Caleb told you." "Caleb tells me nothing," Silas said. "I'm old, not blind. You arrived on the same day Pike got married. You had a letter in your hand when you sat down in the street. The math isn't complicated." He paused. "What does your brother want?" "Money," she said. Silas made a sound that contained an entire education on the subject of people who wanted money. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," she said. "For now." She picked the letter up and took it to her room and put it in the bottom of her carpet bag, under everything else. Then she came back to the kitchen and started on the bread for the week. She was not going to think about Thomas right now. She was going to make bread and think about what she knew, which was this. Thomas had introduced her to Walter. Thomas had facilitated every letter. Thomas had known their family had no land left and no money coming, and that Maribel had no other prospects on the horizon, and he had presented Walter Pike as salvation. And Walter Pike had married Dora Haynes instead, a woman whose family had water rights and a name in the valley. And Thomas had expressed not one word of surprise when it happened. She pressed the dough hard with the heel of her hand. She was not ready to say out loud what that added up to. But she could feel its shape, and its shape was ugly. She was still at the breadboard when she heard horses in the yard. Not just one, but several, and then Caleb's voice outside, sharp in a way she hadn't heard it before. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window, not to look out, but to listen, because the tone of his voice said something was wrong. The back door opened and Caleb came in. His jaw was set the way it got when something was costing him, and he wasn't going to say so. "Who's out there?" she asked. "Harlan Briggs," he said. Silas sat up straighter in his chair. "What does Briggs want?" "Same thing he's wanted for 3 years. Caleb moved to the shelf and got down the metal box where he kept his papers. She'd seen it before and had asked no questions about it, which he'd noticed and seemed to appreciate. "He's saying the north fence line is 10 yards onto his property. Wants me to move it or buy the strip." "Is it on his property?" Maribel asked. Caleb looked at her. He had a way of looking at her when she asked direct questions, like he was recalibrating something each time. "No," he said. "The survey's clear, but surveys cost money to contest, and Briggs knows that. You have the survey papers, right here." He opened the box and pulled out a folded document worn at the creases. "But Briggs has got Alderman Cole in his pocket, and Cole's been making noise about a new assessment of the valley property lines. If Cole orders a reassessment, it takes 6 months minimum, and during that 6 months, Briggs can petition to have the fence treated as an encroachment and have it pulled down." Silas said very quietly, "He's been trying to get that north pasture for 15 years. "What's in the north pasture?" Maribel asked. "Creek access," Caleb said. "Without it, we're dependent on the well for summer grazing. Well's not enough for the full herd in a dry year." He looked at the survey papers. With the north pasture this ranch runs. Without it, he stopped. Without it the ranch doesn't run, Maribel said. Not long term. She looked at him. So Briggs wants to dry you out. That's about the size of it. How much time do you have before Cole moves on the reassessment? Caleb looked at her again, that recalibrating look. Henderson at the store said Cole's been talking about it at the saloon. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then you need documentation that predates anything Briggs can produce, she said. Not just the survey. The original land grant deed records any correspondence about the property lines from the previous owner. Something that makes the survey redundant. Caleb was very still. My father filed the original deed when we settled here. 1871. It should be in the county records. Should be, Silas said, and is are different things when Cole's involved. Where does the county keep its records? Maribel asked. Courthouse in Millhaven, Caleb said. 20 miles east. She dried her hands fully on her apron and untied it. I can write a formal request for the deed record, a letter requesting official confirmation from the county clerk. If you submit it in writing with witnesses, it creates a paper trail that makes any future manipulation visible. She paused. I did my father's correspondence for 15 years. I know how those letters need to read. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Outside, she could hear Briggs and his men still in the yard, the sound of horses shifting, a man's voice saying something she couldn't make out. Go talk to Briggs, she said. Tell him nothing. Tell him you're reviewing the matter. Come back inside. He looked at her. Then he put the survey papers back in the box and went outside. Through the wall, she heard Caleb's voice controlled giving nothing, and then Briggs's voice, which was the voice of a man accustomed to having more leverage than he currently did. After several minutes, she heard horses leaving. Then the door opened and Caleb came back in. She already had paper out on the table and was writing. He stood behind her and read over her shoulder as she wrote, and she was aware of him there, the closeness of it, the slight warmth, but she kept her hand steady and her lettering precise. This is good, he said quietly. It's not good yet, she said. Hand me that survey document. I need the exact filing date. He handed it to her. Their fingers didn't quite touch. She noted that and kept writing. By that evening, she had drafted a formal letter to the county clerk, a request to the Territorial Land Office for a copy of the original settlement grant, and a written record of Briggs's visit that day, signed and dated, which Silas witnessed from his chair by the window, with a steadiness of hand that surprised her. I used to do the ranch accounts, Silas said after he'd signed. Before Eleanor died. I was good with figures. He looked at his signature on the page. Haven't written much since. You write clearly, Maribel said. That matters. The old man looked at her. You're doing more than cooking, he said. I'm doing what needs doing, she said. Caleb picked up the signed record and looked at it. He said nothing for a moment. Then he folded it and put it in the box with everything else and locked the box and put it back on the shelf. Thank you, he said. She nodded and went back to the stove because supper wasn't going to make itself and she was not ready to examine what she was feeling about being thanked like that in that voice by that man. She was not ready for any of that yet. 3 days later, she went to town alone. Caleb had offered to take her, she had supplies to collect, and the letters needed to be sent from the post office, but she told him she could manage, and he had looked at her for a moment and then said, Take the bay mare, she's smooth-gaited. And that had been that. She had not been in Willow Bend alone since the first day. She felt the difference immediately. Without Caleb beside her, she was just the large woman from somewhere else, the one who'd arrived on the day Pike got married, the one who'd ended up out at the Rusk Ranch. She could see it in the way people looked at her as she tied the mare outside the post office, the assessments, the whispers that stopped just before they were audible. She kept her back straight and walked into the post office. The postmaster was a thin man named Garvey, who had been in Willow Bend long enough to know everything and was not careful enough about how clearly he showed it. He took her letters and her postal fees and looked at the addresses on the envelopes with unconcealed interest. County Clerk, he said, reading. Territorial Land Office. He looked at her. Rusk business. My business, she said. which I'll thank you to process without commentary. Garvey's eyebrows went up. He stamped the letters and put them in the outgoing tray without another word. She was heading back to the mayor when she heard her name. Not spoken to her, spoken about her. Two women on the sidewalk outside the milliner's, not making any particular effort to lower their voices, because women like Maribel Bell were not, in their experience, women who responded. Can't imagine what Caleb Rusk is thinking bringing a woman like that into his house. Well, what choice did he have, the old man barely eating? Still a woman with no family, no name shows up on the very day Pike's wedding. Maribel stopped walking. She turned around. The two women, one older one, younger, the younger one, with the grace to look alarmed, the older one with none, went quiet as she walked back toward them. "I beg your pardon," Maribel said. She kept her voice level and clear. "I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're suggesting that a woman who arrived in this town alone, having been deceived into traveling 1,000 miles on a false promise, is the person in this situation whose character is in question." The older woman drew herself up. "I don't believe I was speaking to you." "You were speaking about me," Maribel said. "Which is close enough. And since we're speaking, my name is Maribel Bell. I work for Caleb Rusk as his housekeeper and cook. I have a room, a lock on my door, and an honest wage. If there is something specific you'd like to say to me about that arrangement, I will stand here and hear it. Otherwise, I would appreciate it if you could find something else to discuss." The silence on that sidewalk was complete. The younger woman made a very small sound that might have been suppressed admiration. The older woman looked at Maribel for a long moment. Then she said stiffly, "Good day, Miss Bell," and turned and went inside the milliner's. Maribel looked at the younger woman who was still standing there. "I'm Clara Weston," the younger woman said. "My husband has the land south of Rusk's." She paused. That took courage. "It took irritation," Maribel said, "which is sometimes the same thing." Clara Weston laughed a short, surprised laugh and then pressed her lips together like she hadn't intended to. "If you ever need anything in town," she said more carefully, "my husband's store is the dry goods on the second block. I'm there most mornings." Maribel looked at her. "Thank you, Mrs. Weston." She untied the mare and rode back to the ranch. She didn't tell Caleb about the women on the sidewalk. She didn't tell him about Garvey reading the envelope addresses. She just came in and hung up her coat and started supper, and when he asked how town had been, she said, "Fine, letters are sent," and that was all. But something had shifted in her on that sidewalk. Something had clarified. She was not going to be invisible in this town. She had tried invisible for 34 years, and it had not protected her from a single thing. She was going to be known, and she was going to be known on her own terms, and if that made certain people uncomfortable, they were welcome to their discomfort. It was Silas who noticed at supper that night. "Something happened in town," he said. "Nothing worth reporting," she said. "Something happened," he said again. "You're sitting different." Caleb looked up from his plate. "I had a conversation," Maribel said, "with a woman who had opinions about my being here. I expressed my own opinions in return. The matter is settled." Caleb set down his fork. "Who?" "It doesn't matter who," she said. "Maribel." She looked at him. It was the first time he had used her given name. He seemed to realize it at the same moment she did. A slight shift in his expression, something caught and not quite released. "It doesn't matter who," she said again more quietly. "I handled it." He looked at her for a moment, then he picked up his fork. "I don't doubt it," he said. And she recognized those words. They were the same words he had said to her the first evening in the street, and she had not forgotten them. She filed this away with the other things she was collecting about him. The letter from the county clerk arrived 10 days later, and it was not what any of them had hoped for. Caleb read it standing at the kitchen table, not sitting down, which told Maribel everything about what was in it before he said a word. Silas watched his son's face and said nothing. "They have no record," Caleb said. "The county clerk's office says there is no deed on file for the Rusk property north of the creek line." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's not possible," Silas said. I filed that deed myself, 19 years ago. I know, Caleb said. I rode to Millhaven personally. I paid the filing fee. I have the receipt. Where's the receipt? Maribel asked. Silas pushed himself to his feet. He moved to the back of the house. She heard him in what she understood was his old study, a room he almost never went into. And after several minutes, he came back with a tin box she hadn't seen before. He opened it on the table. Letters, papers, a folded document, and a small square of paper at the bottom. He held it up. Right here. Maribel took it from him carefully. It was a county clerk's receipt for deed filing dated March 14, 1871, with a file number stamped on it in faded blue ink. She looked at Caleb. Someone removed the deed from the county record. The word someone sat in the kitchen like a stone dropped in still water. Cole, Caleb said, flat, certain. Can you prove it? Not without the deed itself. You have the receipt, she said. That's the filing record. It proves the deed was submitted. If the deed is missing from the county archive, the receipt proves it was there and is now absent. She looked at the paper in her hand. That's not a clerical error. That's removal. And removal is a different thing entirely. That's tampering with a public record, which is a criminal matter, not a property dispute. Silas sat down heavily. He looked at his hands. Caleb looked at the receipt, then at Maribel. You think Cole took it? I think someone with access to the county archive wanted that deed to disappear, she said. And I think it disappeared at a convenient time for Harlan Briggs. She set the receipt down carefully. The Territorial Land Office, did they respond? Not yet. When they do, she said, if the original settlement grant is on file there, and it should be because territorial grants are federal records and harder to touch, then you have what you need. The grant predates the deed. It establishes the property lines independent of the county clerk's record. She looked at him steadily. The receipt and the grant together are your case. Caleb was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the recalibrating look and not the careful distance he usually maintained. Something more open than either of those. Something that cost him something to let through. How do you know all this? He asked. My father disputed a boundary claim when I was 17, she said. He lost. I spent the next 3 years reading every document I could find about why he lost and what he should have done differently. She paused. He didn't have a receipt. The ghost of something crossed Caleb's face. I'm sorry, he said. So was he, she said. That's why I'm telling you not to make the same mistake. Don't go to Briggs, don't go to Cole, don't make any noise until you have the territorial grant in hand. When you have it, you go straight to the federal land agent, not the county, because Cole has no jurisdiction over federal records. She held his eyes. Can you wait? I can wait, he said. Then wait. She picked up the receipt and the tin box, and carried them to her room, and put them with Walter's letter at the bottom of her carpetbag, because she was not going to let those documents sit in the kitchen where anyone coming to the house could see them, and because she had already decided, without quite deciding it consciously, that protecting this ranch had become part of what she was here to do. She sat on the edge of her bed for a moment. She thought about that. She had come here with nothing. She had been given work and a room and $2 a week, and she had done her job, and somewhere in the doing of it, she had crossed a line she hadn't noticed crossing from employee to something that didn't have a clean word for it yet. The ranch mattered to her. Silas mattered to her. The careful, deliberate, quietly decent man out in the kitchen who had used her given name for the first time tonight, and then caught himself doing it, he mattered to her, and that was the most alarming thing she had encountered in 11 days, full of alarming things, and she was going to put it in the same place she was putting everything else and come back to it when she could afford to. She went back to the kitchen. Caleb was still at the table. Silas had gone to bed. There's something else, Caleb said. She sat down across from him. Tell me. Briggs talked to Pike this week, Walter Pike. His jaw was tight. Briggs is on the town council. Pike's new wife's family, the Hayneses, they have influence with the council. Briggs is pushing for a council vote on the property reassessment. If he gets a majority, the county reassessment gets funding and Cole gets official authority to run it. When's the vote? 3 weeks. She looked at the table. 3 weeks. The Territorial Land Office response could take 4 to 6. That was the gap, the window during which Briggs would move with Cole's help and the Pike family's influence to make the reassessment look like routine procedure rather than what it actually was. "Who else on the council do you trust?" she asked. "Roy Weston," he said. "Maybe one other." Weston. She looked up. Clara Weston's husband. Caleb's eyes sharpened. "You know Clara Weston. I met her in town," Maribel said. "Briefly?" He was quiet for a moment. "Roy's a fair man. He'd need a reason to vote against Briggs. Briggs has done him favors. But if he knew what Briggs was actually after, what the reassessment would really do to smaller ranches in the valley, then he'd need to know," Maribel said. "Not from you. You have a direct interest, and they'll discount it. He'd need to hear it from someone without a stake." Caleb looked at her. "Or someone who appears to have no stake," she said. "Which is a different thing." The silence between them was careful and full. "I can visit Clara Weston," Maribel said. "She invited me to. I can have a conversation. I won't misrepresent anything. I'll tell her exactly what is true, which is that a property reassessment in this valley benefits Briggs and no one else, and that there are families who will lose creek access if the fence lines move. That's not politics. That's fact." Caleb leaned forward slightly, both elbows on the table, and looked at her with that open expression that cost him something. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "This is more than cooking and cleaning." She met his eyes. "Because Briggs is running the same play on you that someone ran on my father," she said. "And because your father ate breakfast at the table for the first time in years the morning after I made supper." She paused. "And because I don't like watching people take things from people who worked for them honestly. I never have." He was quiet for a long time. "Maribel," he said, and stopped. "Don't," she said quietly. "Not yet. Let's win first." Something moved in his face, something that was too large for the kitchen and too new for either of them to look at directly. He pulled it back. She watched him do it and did not look away because she wanted him to know she had seen it. "All right," he said. "We win first." She pushed back from the table and stood up and started the kettle for the end of evening tea that had become without either of them remarking on it. Something that happened every night now, the two of them at the table after Silas went to bed, talking through whatever the day had left unfinished. She set 2 cups out. She heard him exhale behind her, a long, quiet breath, the kind a man lets out when he has been holding something for a while without knowing it. Outside, the Montana dark was full and cold and pressing at the windows. And somewhere in Willow Bend, Harlan Briggs and Walter Pike and a man named Cole were planning what they thought was the end of the Rusk Ranch, and they had no idea, not one of them, that there was a woman in that kitchen who had spent 34 years being underestimated and who was for the first time in her life exactly where she needed to be. The kettle began to whistle. She poured the tea. And when she set Caleb's cup in front of him and turned to get her own, she did not see his hand move toward where hers had been on the table, reaching just slightly, and then stopping. But Silas, who had not actually gone to bed, who was standing in the hallway in the dark just far enough back to be invisible, saw it. The old man stood very still. Then he turned and went quietly back to his room, and for the first time in 4 years he fell asleep without having to work at it. The territorial land grant arrived on a Tuesday, and Maribel knew before she even unfolded it that it was going to change everything. She had been the one to collect the mail that morning. Caleb was out with the fence line on the south pasture. Silas was at the kitchen table with his coffee, and she had seen the federal stamp on the envelope and felt something tighten in her chest. She carried it inside and set it on the table and looked at it for a moment before she picked it up again. "That's it," Silas said. He had seen the stamp too. "I think so," she said. "Open it." She opened it. The territorial settlement grant for the Rusk property was dated June 3, 1870, a full year before the county deed filing, which meant it predated every document Briggs had or could produce. The property lines were described in precise legal language, and the north boundary, the one Briggs was contesting, was drawn clearly along the creek, not 10 yards south of it. The grant was signed by the Federal Land Commissioner and bore an official seal that no county official could touch. Maribel read it twice. Then she set it down on the table very carefully, the way you set down something that could break if you weren't precise about it. "Well," Silas said. "Well," she agreed. She went to her room and got the receipt from the bottom of her carpet bag and brought it back and laid it beside the grant. The two documents together told a complete story, one that began with federal authorization and ended with a county clerk's receipt for a deed that had subsequently vanished from county records. The gap between those two facts was not an accident, and it was not a clerical error, and anyone looking at them together would know it. She was still looking at them when she heard Caleb's horse in the yard. He came in through the back and stopped when he saw her face. "What happened?" "Sit down," she said. He sat. She pushed the documents across the table to him and watched him read. She watched his jaw set and release and set again. She watched something move through him that was not quite hope and not quite anger, but was in the territory of both. He looked up. "This is enough." "It's more than enough," she said. "But we need to move before the council vote. The vote is in 11 days. If Briggs gets his reassessment funded before we present this to the federal land agent, he can tie things up in procedural challenge long enough to damage the ranch's summer grazing, regardless of what the documents say." She paused. "We need to go to Millhaven, not the county clerk, the federal land agent's office. And we need to go before Briggs finds out we have this." Caleb looked at the grant again. "How did you know to request it from the territorial office and not the county?" "Because county records can be interfered with," she said. "Federal records are harder. And because my father's deed was county filed and county lost, and we never found it again." She folded her hands on the table. "I wasn't going to let that happen twice." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "We leave tomorrow morning." Silas from his chair said, "I'm coming." Both of them looked at him. "I filed that deed," the old man said. "I paid that fee. I have the receipt, and I have 19 years of running this ranch on that land, and I am not going to sit in this kitchen while my son and this woman go fight for it without me." He looked at Caleb with an expression that didn't leave any room for argument. "I'm coming." Caleb looked at his father. Really looked at him in a way Maribel had not seen before, and something crossed his face that was too complicated to name. He nodded once. "All right, Papa." That night, Maribel wrote 3 letters. One to Clara Weston, outlining the situation with the missing deed and the federal grant in plain language, asking her to share it with Roy in whatever way she thought best. One to the federal land agent in Millhaven, requesting an urgent appointment on a matter of record tampering. And one she sat with for a long time before she wrote it a letter to the county clerk in Millhaven, CC'd to the territorial governor's office, formally notifying them that a filed deed was missing from county records, and that she had documentary evidence of its original submission. She didn't consult Caleb before she wrote that last one. She wrote it, sealed it, and put it with the others. She would tell him about it in the morning. She almost told him that night when they had their tea and the kitchen was quiet. He was sitting across from her with his hands around his cup, and she could see him working through the logistics of tomorrow, the road to Millhaven, the federal office, what he would say and how. She watched him think, and did not interrupt it, because she had learned in the past weeks that Caleb Rusk did his best thinking in silence, and her best contribution was sometimes simply to be there while he did it. But then he said, "Maribel," and she said, "Yes." And he said, "If this works," and then stopped. "When it works," she said. He looked at her. "When it works. I want you to know that whatever happens after whatever you decide you want to do, I want you to know that this place—" He stopped again. The words were costing him. She could see that, and she did not hurry him. "This place has been a different thing since you came," he said. "My father is eating. He's talking. He signed his name to a document last week and his hand didn't shake." He looked at the table. I haven't known how to make it a home again. Since my mother. I kept it running. That's all I knew how to do. Caleb, she said softly. I'm not saying this right, he said. You're saying it fine, she said. He looked up at her. His eyes were very direct and very honest, and it was almost more than she could hold. I don't want you to leave, he said. That's what I'm saying. Not because of the cooking, not because of the documents, because of... He stopped a third time. His jaw worked. Because of all of it, he said finally. Because of who you are. The kitchen was completely quiet. Maribel looked at him. She felt something large and warm and terrifying moving in her chest. And she thought about Walter Pike's letter at the bottom of her carpet bag. And she thought about Thomas's handwriting on an envelope asking for $20. And she thought about 34 years of being assessed and found wanting before she opened her mouth. Ask me again, she said. When this is finished, when the ranch is safe and the documents are filed and Briggs has been answered. Ask me again when I'm not a woman with nowhere else to go. She held his eyes. Because I want to answer you when I have a choice. Not when I need you. He was very still. Then slowly he nodded. That's fair, he said. It is, she said. They sat for a while longer. The fire in the stove ticked. Outside the wind had picked up. She drank her tea, and he drank his, and neither of them said anything else, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have put something important down in a safe place and trust that it will still be there when they come back for it. She went to bed and lay in the dark and thought, let me hold this together long enough to find out who I am when I'm not fighting for survival. That was all she asked. Just enough time to find that out. In the morning, she told him about the letter to the county clerk. He read it at the breakfast table standing up, and she watched his expression move through several things in quick succession. Then he set it down. You copied it to the governor's office, he said. Yes, that's going to make noise. That's the point, she said. If Cole knows the governor's office has been formally notified of the missing deed, any move he makes after this point looks like obstruction. It freezes him. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I would have been too careful to do that. I know, she said. Too afraid of making enemies. You don't have the luxury of being afraid of enemies anymore, she said. Briggs made himself your enemy the day he sent men to your fence line. The only question now is whether you let him choose the ground or you do. Silas, buttering his bread without looking up, said, She's right. Caleb picked up the letter and looked at it once more. Then he handed it back to her. Send it, he said. They left for Millhaven an hour later, all three of them in the wagon, the documents in the metal box on the seat between Maribel and Caleb Silas in the back, wrapped in the good wool blanket she had found in the cedar chest in the hallway, and shaken out, and decided was too good to leave there. The road to Millhaven took them through the eastern edge of the valley, past the Weston property, and she looked at the homestead as they passed and thought about Clara Weston, opening the letter she'd written and reading it at her kitchen table the way Maribel had read Thomas's letter at hers. She hoped Clara would tell Roy tonight. She needed Roy Weston to walk into that council meeting in 10 days, with his mind already made up. She was thinking about this when Caleb said without looking at her, The woman at the milliner's, the one you didn't tell me about. She looked at him. How do you know about that? Clara Weston told Roy. Roy told me. A pause. He said Clara said you handled yourself like you'd been standing on that sidewalk your whole life. I have been, Maribel said. Different sidewalks, same situation. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he said. That you have to. Don't be sorry, she said. Just make sure the ranch is worth it. He almost smiled. She was learning to catch the small movements at the corner of his mouth that were as close as he got most days. The federal land agent's office in Millhaven was a room above the assayer's office run by a man named Aldous Pratt, who had the organized, unhurried manner of someone who had spent decades watching people come in with problems, and had learned that the problems were almost always simpler than the people carrying them believed. He looked at the territorial grant. He looked at the receipt. He looked at the county clerk's letter stating no deed was on file. Then he looked at Maribel because she had been the one to lay out the sequence of documents and explain their significance, and she had done it in precise, uninterrupted language that left no room for misinterpretation. "Who prepared this summary?" he asked. "I did," she said. "You're the housekeeper." "I'm the one who read the documents," she said. Pratt looked at her for a moment, then back at the papers. "The grant is valid and federally registered. The property lines it describes are the legal boundary. The county has no authority to reassess property lines that are established by federal grant. Any county reassessment would need federal authorization, which would require demonstrating that the original grant was in error." He looked up. "It wasn't in error." "No," Maribel said. "It wasn't. The missing deed is a separate matter. That's a county records issue. But with the grant in hand, the deed is largely redundant for the purpose of establishing your property rights." He looked at Caleb. "What you need is a certified copy of this grant filed with the county on record, so that any future action by the county clerk operates in the shadow of the federal document. I can prepare that certification today." "Today," Caleb said. "It'll take 2 hours," Pratt said. He looked at Maribel again, a look that was not quite what she was accustomed to from men in official positions. More like the look one professional gives another when they recognize competence. "You want a second copy?" "3 copies," she said. "One for county filing, one for the ranch records, one held here in the federal office." Pratt nodded slowly. "3 copies," he said, and wrote it down. They waited in the anteroom while Pratt worked. Silas sat in a chair against the wall with his hands folded and his eyes closed. Not sleeping, she could tell by the set of his jaw, just resting and thinking. Caleb stood at the window. After a while, he said without turning around, "Cole is going to know we were here by tomorrow." "Yes," she said. "He'll tell Briggs." "Yes." "Briggs will move faster. He can't move faster than a federal certification," she said. "That's why we're here today, and not next week." Caleb turned from the window. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her the night before in the kitchen, that open, costly expression. "I keep waiting for the part where you tell me there's something you can't fix," he said. "There's plenty I can't fix," she said. "I can't fix Thomas. I can't fix what Walter Pike did. I can't fix 34 years of being in rooms where no one thought I had anything to contribute." She looked at him steadily. "But this I can fix, so I'm fixing it." He held her eyes for a long moment. Then he looked at his father, who had opened one eye. "She's something," Silas said without any particular inflection. "Yes," Caleb said. "She is." Maribel looked at her hands and did not say anything. They were back in Willow Bend by late afternoon. 3 certified copies of the territorial grant in the metal box, one already addressed and ready to file with the county the following morning. She had made Caleb write his name on the filing envelope himself because it needed to be his name and not hers, and she had made him put the date on it in his own handwriting, so there was no question later of when it had been submitted. He had done it without argument, which she had noted. They were unhitching the wagon when Roy Weston rode into the yard. He was a solid man, mid-40s, with the look of someone who had been fair his whole life, and had found that fairness was a heavier load than he'd expected, but had decided to carry it anyway. He nodded at Caleb, and then looked at Maribel with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of a man who had heard about her from his wife and was now taking his own measure. "Miss Bell," he said, "Clara sends her regards. Please return them," she said. "She also says to tell you that your letter was her word clarifying." He looked at Caleb. "I've been on that council 3 years. I voted with Briggs on 4 things I shouldn't have because I didn't have the full picture. I have the full picture now." He paused. "I'm voting against the reassessment, and I think I can bring Alderman Patterson with me. That's a majority." Caleb was very still. "Roy, don't thank me," Weston said. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because Briggs has been running a long game in this valley, and I don't like being a piece in it." He looked at Maribel again. "Your letter laid it out clear. The missing deed, the federal grant, what a reassessment would actually do to creek access for 6 ranches in this valley, not just Rusk's. He touched the brim of his hat. That was good work. He rode out. Maribel stood in the yard with the metal box under her arm and let the relief move through her for exactly 10 seconds. Then she put it away. "That's 3 pieces in place," she said. "The grant is certified. Weston is voting against the reassessment. The letter to the governor's office is on its way." She looked at Caleb. "Briggs still has Cole, and Cole can still make noise about the missing deed, even if the noise doesn't go anywhere legally. He might try to use it publicly at the council meeting in the saloon, wherever he thinks it does the most damage." "Let him," Caleb said. "We need to be ready when he does," she said. "We need to be in that council meeting." "I'll be there," Caleb said. "So will I," she said. He looked at her. "You don't have to. I wrote the letter that brought Weston in," she said. "I prepared the documents that Pratt certified. If Cole stands up in that meeting and misrepresents any of it, I want to be in the room." She met his eyes. "I'm not a weapon you keep in the kitchen, Caleb. I'm a person who has been paying attention, and I want to be in the room." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You'll be in the room." She nodded and went inside. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that while they had been in Millhaven that day, a man had arrived in Willow Bend on the afternoon stage. A man who had taken a room at Mrs. Holt's boarding house and eaten supper in the saloon, and asked in the careful, casual way of someone who had practiced asking where he might find a woman named Maribel Bell. His name was Thomas Bell, and he had not come because he missed his sister. She found out the next morning. Clara Weston came to the ranch before breakfast, her horse lathered from riding fast, her face carrying the look of someone bringing news they wish they didn't have. "Your brother's in town," Clara said when Maribel opened the door. The words landed like something physical. "How do you know it's my brother?" Maribel said. "Because he came into Roy's store this morning asking for directions to the Rusk Ranch," Clara said. "And he told Roy his name was Thomas Bell, and he'd come from Pennsylvania to check on his sister." She paused. "Roy thought you should know before he showed up here." Maribel stood very still in the doorway. Thomas. Here. Now 4 days before the council vote, 3 days after they had filed the federal grant with the county, 2 days after the letter to the governor's office had been sent. The timing was not a coincidence. "Come in," she said to Clara. "Sit down. Tell me exactly what he said to Roy." Clara sat at the kitchen table. Caleb came in from the back and stopped when he saw Clara's face and then looked at Maribel. "Thomas is here," Maribel said. Something moved in Caleb's expression. Not surprised, he had understood for weeks what Thomas's involvement in all of this might mean, but something harder and more focused. "What do you want to do?" he said. She looked at Clara, then at Caleb, then out at the empty road through the kitchen window, because Thomas would come up that road and she needed to decide before he did exactly who she was going to be when he arrived. For 34 years, she had been the person Thomas could rely on to absorb things quietly. The person who did not make scenes, did not demand explanations, did not press on the parts that hurt because she was afraid of what pressing might cost her. She thought about the council vote in 4 days. She thought about Walter Pike's letter at the bottom of her carpet bag. She thought about her good winter coat. "I'm going to let him come," she said. "And I'm going to let him tell me whatever story he's prepared. And I'm going to listen to all of it." She looked at Caleb. "And then I'm going to show him what I know." "Maribel," Caleb said, a warning note in his voice. "I'm not going to lose my temper," she said. "I'm not going to give him anything he can use. I'm going to be very calm and very clear, and then I'm going to let him understand that whatever arrangement he made with Walter Pike, whatever money changed hands, whatever he got in return for delivering me out here with nothing, it is going to come out." She paused. "All of it." Clara said quietly. "What arrangement?" Maribel looked at her. Clara Weston had become in a matter of weeks the closest thing to a friend she had in this valley, and she deserved the truth. "I believe my brother sold Walter Pike my cooperation," she said. "Not me, he didn't sell a person. But he sold a version of me. He told Walter I was agreeable and capable, and that I wanted a husband and a home in the West, and had no family left to return to. He made me a neat package, and he handed it to Walter Pike in exchange for something money, land access, a business arrangement. I don't know what yet, and when Walter decided Dora Haynes was a better deal, Thomas sent me here anyway, because he needed me out of Pennsylvania and out of the way. The kitchen was very quiet. Out of the way of what? Caleb asked. That, Maribel said, is what I intend to find out. Thomas Bell arrived at the Rusk Ranch at 10:30. He came in a hired buggy, which told Maribel he had money, which told her the arrangement with Walter had paid off before it had fallen apart. He stepped down and straightened his coat. The same gesture she remembered from childhood, the way he always arranged himself before a performance, and looked at the ranch house with an expression of managed concern. She was standing on the porch. She had decided to be on the porch. Not in the doorway, not inside on the porch, in the open, where everything that was said could be heard by whatever witnesses she chose to have there. Caleb was just inside the door. Silas was at the table. Clara had gone home, but she had taken notes. Maribel, Thomas said. He looked genuinely relieved to see her, and she understood that he was genuinely relieved not because he loved her, but because she was standing and functional and not visibly furious, which made his task easier. Thomas, she said, you've come a long way. I was worried about you, he said. He came up the porch steps and moved to embrace her, and she stepped back just one step, and his arms dropped. He registered that. She watched him register it and recalibrate. I'm fine, she said. As you can see, I have a position and a room and honest work. She looked at him evenly. Sit down. He sat in the porch chair. She remained standing. I know this has been difficult, he said. What happened with Walter, I was as surprised as anyone. Were you? She said. He paused. Of course. I introduced you in good faith. I had no idea he was Thomas, she said. Stop. He stopped. I have Walter's letters, she said. All of them. I have the dates, I have the sequence. I know when you visited Pittsburgh, and I know when the first letter arrived, and I know that the letter arrived 9 days after your visit, which is very quick for correspondence between strangers to become a marriage proposal. She kept her voice completely level. I also know that you told me to sell my winter coat. You told me to tell everyone goodbye. You told me to come with nothing I couldn't carry. She paused. You were very thorough. Thomas was very still. What did he give you? She said. The silence stretched. Thomas, she said. I'm going to find out. I have people in Millhaven who are already looking. I have a letter on its way to the governor's office about property record tampering in this county. And when that office begins asking questions, the name Walter Pike is going to come up, and when it comes up, your name is going to be next to it. She looked at him without any particular heat, because she had decided that heat was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. So, you can tell me now, or you can tell someone else later, under considerably worse circumstances. Your choice. Thomas looked at his hands. He looked at the yard. He looked at his sister's face, and something in what he saw there, the stillness of it, the absolute absence of the softness he had been counting on moved through him visibly. Land, he said. He gave me 20 acres and water access on the north edge of the Haynes property. He stopped. In exchange for me, she said. In exchange for the introduction, he said quickly. That's all it was supposed to be. The introduction was a transaction, she said. I was the commodity. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, and in his face, beneath the performance, beneath the managed concern and the practiced composure, she saw something that might have been actual shame. Small and late and insufficient, but there. Maribel, he said. I'm sorry. She looked at him. She thought about everything she had done in the past weeks. The documents, the letters, Silas at the breakfast table, Caleb's voice saying, I don't want you to leave in the kitchen at night. I know you are, she said. But sorry isn't what I need from you right now. She looked at him steadily. What I need is a written account of the arrangement. What was exchanged when and between whom? Signed and witnessed. She paused. Because Harlan Briggs is going to stand up in front of the Willow Bend Town Council in 4 days and try to take this ranch and somewhere in the arrangement you made with Walter Pike, I believe there is a connection to what Briggs has been doing with these property lines. And if that connection exists, it exists, Thomas said, very quietly. The air on the porch changed. Tell me, she said. He told her. It took 20 minutes, and it was worse than she had imagined, and it was exactly as bad as the part of her that had been paying attention for 34 years had known it would be. Walter Pike and Harlan Briggs had been working together for 2 years, Pike providing the social access and the council connections through the Haynes family. Briggs providing the land muscle and the pressure. The missing deed from the county records was not Cole acting alone. It was Cole acting on Briggs's instruction with Pike's knowledge as part of a coordinated effort to acquire creek access across the Northern Valley. Thomas had known about Pike and Briggs. Not all of it, but enough. He had known enough, and he had sent his sister anyway. When he was done talking, Maribel stood very still for a moment. Then she said, "Come inside. You're going to write all of that down. Caleb Rusk is going to witness it. And then you are going to stay in Willow Bend until after the council vote, because I may need you to say it in public." Thomas looked at her, at this woman who had arrived in Montana with 37 cents and a broken promise, and had somehow in the space of a few weeks become the most dangerous person in his immediate situation. "All right," he said. She opened the door and gestured him inside. Caleb was standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed and his jaw set in that way that meant he had heard everything, and his eyes, when they met Maribel's, said plainly that he was ready for whatever came next. Silas looked at Thomas with the clear, unfiltered gaze of a very old man who had just heard a young man confess to something shameful, and said without any expression at all, "Sit down, son. This is going to take a while." Thomas sat. Maribel got paper from the shelf, and 4 days before the council vote that was supposed to end the Rusk Ranch, the walls that Briggs and Pike had spent 2 years building began quietly and completely to come apart. Thomas wrote for 2 hours. Maribel sat across the table from him the entire time, not watching his hand move across the paper, but watching his face, because his face told her when he was being precise, and when he was softening something, and when he was about to stop, and she would have to say quietly, "Keep going," and he would keep going. Caleb stood at the back of the room for the first 20 minutes and then sat down, because standing made it feel like an interrogation, and she didn't want Thomas defensive, she wanted him thorough. Silas stayed at his chair by the window and said nothing, which was its own kind of pressure. The old man had a gift for silence that weighed something. When Thomas set down the pen, there were 4 pages. Maribel picked them up and read them from the beginning. She read slowly, and she did not react because reacting was information she wasn't prepared to give him yet. When she finished, she set the pages down and aligned them carefully at the edges, and then looked at her brother. "The 20 acres Briggs deeded to you through Pike," she said. "Are they recorded?" Thomas nodded. "Werke County Clerk, Millhaven." She looked at Caleb. "Same county clerk who lost your deed." "Cole," Caleb said. His voice was flat and very controlled. "So Cole recorded Thomas's land transfer from Briggs," she said, "and erased your deed, in the same office, in the same period." She looked at Thomas. "When was your deed recorded?" Thomas said February. "The Rusk deed went missing in January," Caleb said. Nobody spoke for a moment. "That's not a coincidence," Silas said from his chair. "That's a sequence." Maribel picked up the 4 pages and straightened them again, a gesture she had used her whole life when she needed her hands to do something calm while her mind moved fast. "Thomas," she said, "did Pike tell you about the Rusk property specifically? Did he mention the north pasture, the creek access?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, too long. "Thomas, he said there was land in the valley that was going to change hands," Thomas said. "He didn't use names. He said the water access situation in the Northern Valley was going to be reorganized. That's the word he used. Reorganized. And you didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know what it meant. Thomas said. The honesty of that landed harder than anything else he'd said. Caleb pushed back from the table and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room, and Maribel watched his shoulders and gave him 30 seconds before she spoke again, because he needed those 30 seconds, and she knew it. "We have 3 days," she said to the room, rather than to any one person. "The council vote is Thursday evening. Briggs will be there, Pike will be there, or his influence will be through the Haynes family. Cole may be there." She looked at Thomas. "You're going to be there." Thomas looked up sharply. "Not to confess publicly," she said. "Not yet. I want you in that room so that Briggs can see you, so that Pike can see you, so they know that whatever they thought they controlled has moved." She paused. "People make mistakes when they're frightened. I want them frightened before Thursday." "Maribel," Caleb said from the window. He turned around. "If we walk into that council meeting with Thomas and his written account, and the federal grant, Briggs is going to know it's over. He's not a man who accepts that quietly." "No," she agreed. "He isn't. He has 3 days to do something about it." "Yes. That concerns me. It concerns me too," she said. "Which is why we're not waiting for Thursday." She looked at the 4 pages on the table. "I'm going to town this afternoon. I'm going to visit Clara Weston. And then I'm going to visit every family in this valley that Briggs's reassessment would affect. 6 ranches," Roy said. 6 families who don't know yet that their creek access is at stake, not just ours." She paused. "By Thursday evening, I want every one of those families in that meeting room." Silas said, "That's a lot of ground to cover in 3 days." "Then I'd better start today," she said. She was at the door with her coat when Caleb said, "I'm coming with you." She stopped. "You have fence work." "The fence can wait." He said it in a tone that was not asking. She looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. Thomas said from the table, "What do you want me to do?" Maribel looked at her brother. She thought about 20 acres and water access, and the word reorganized, and her good winter coat. She thought about the $20 he'd asked for in his first letter, the one that had arrived before she'd had time to understand what he'd done. "Stay here," she said. "Stay with Silas. Don't go into town. Don't talk to anyone." She held his eyes. "And think very carefully about what kind of man you want to be when this is over, because you have a chance here to be something different than what you've been. That chance doesn't come back twice." Thomas looked at his hands. He looked like a man who had just fully understood the weight of something he had been carrying lightly for a long time. "I know," he said. She went out. The next 3 days were the hardest and the most purposeful of Maribel Bell's life. She and Caleb rode to 5 ranches in 2 days. At each one she sat at a kitchen table. She didn't know drank coffee she hadn't made, and explained in plain language what a county-level property reassessment would do to creek access in the Northern Valley. She brought the certified copy of the federal grant. She brought the receipt with the filing date. She brought Thomas's written account with the names and the dates and the word reorganized, and she let each family read it for themselves. Most of them had heard of Harlan Briggs. Most of them had felt his edges, without knowing they were his. A water fee raised for no stated reason. A fence dispute that had resolved itself strangely. An application for grazing permits that had taken longer than it should. At the second ranch, a woman named Hester Caulfield read Thomas's account and then looked at Maribel and said, "My husband lost a grazing permit renewal 3 years ago. Cost us 40 head that summer. We never knew why." "It may have been Cole," Maribel said. "We can't prove it yet, but we're trying. What do you need from us?" "Show up Thursday," Maribel said. "Bring your husband. Bring your deed if you have it. Just be in that room." Hester Caulfield looked at her husband, who nodded. She looked back at Maribel. "We'll be there," she said. At the 4th ranch, the man, a widower named Garrett, broad-shouldered and slow to trust, read the documents and then looked at Caleb. "Rusk," he said. "I heard your fence line was the issue." "It is," Caleb said. "But if Briggs gets a county reassessment, it won't just be my fence line. It'll be every property north of the creek road." Garrett looked at Maribel. "Who are you exactly?" "I work for Caleb Rusk," she said. "You wrote these letters." He held up the summary she had prepared for each family, one-page clear language, the key facts in order. Yes. And you prepared the federal filing? Yes. Garrett looked at the page again. Then he looked at Caleb with the expression of a man recalibrating something he'd believed without examining it. Your housekeeper prepared a federal land case. She did, Caleb said. Garrett looked at Maribel with something that was not quite an apology, but was close to one. Thursday, he said. I'll be there. They were riding back toward the ranch at the end of the second day, when Caleb said without preamble, They keep expecting me to have done all of this. Yes, she said. It doesn't bother you. She thought about it. It used to, she said. The version of me that arrived in this town 6 weeks ago would have found it unbearable. But right now, I don't care who they think did it. I care that they show up Thursday. Caleb was quiet for a while. You're going to care later, he said. Not an accusation, an observation. Probably, she said. That's a problem for later. I'll tell them, he said. At the meeting. I'll make sure everyone in that room knows. She looked at him. He was looking at the road ahead, jaw set in that familiar way, but there was something different in his profile, a resolution that was about more than the council meeting. You don't have to do that, she said. No, he said. But I'm going to. She looked at the road too. Caleb, she said after a while. When this is over. I know, he said, quietly. I'm going to hold you to that, she said. I'm counting on it, he said. They rode the rest of the way home without talking, and it was the most comfortable silence she had ever sat inside. Wednesday night, the night before the council vote, Maribel could not sleep. She lay in her room and stared at the ceiling and went through everything in her head the way she always did when she couldn't sleep. Not worrying exactly, but auditing. The federal grant certified on file. Thomas's written account signed and witnessed by Caleb and Silas. Roy Weston and his vote. The 5 families who had said they would come. The summary page she had prepared for the council members themselves, which she intended to place on each chair before the meeting opened. That last piece she had not told Caleb about yet. She thought about telling him, decided she would in the morning, and then heard a sound from the kitchen, and lay still for a moment before she recognized it. The creak of the chair that Caleb sat in when he stayed up late, the one closest to the stove. She got up. She put on her coat over her nightdress and went to the kitchen. He was sitting in his chair with a cup that had gone cold in front of him, staring at the table. He looked up when she came in. He did not look surprised. You couldn't sleep either, she said. No. She put the kettle on and sat down across from him. The kitchen was warm. He had kept the stove going, and outside the wind had died, and the night was very still. Tell me what you're worried about, she said. He looked at his cold cup. Briggs has had 3 days to think, he said. 3 days to figure out that something has changed. He's going to walk into that room tomorrow, and he's going to be ready for something. I just don't know what. Neither do I, she said. But we have the documents. We have the witnesses. We have Weston's vote. She paused. What we don't have is surprise. He knows we have something he doesn't know how much. Thomas, Caleb said. She looked at him. You think Thomas talked to someone? I think Thomas has spent his life talking to people when he shouldn't, Caleb said. And he's been in this valley for 4 days. She had thought about this. She had thought about it more than she had let on. If Thomas talked, she said carefully, then Briggs knows about the written account, which means he's going to try to discredit it, challenge it as coerced, or claim Thomas was misrepresenting the arrangement. She folded her hands on the table. Which means we need Thomas to be very clear and very consistent tomorrow. Whatever he says in that room has to match exactly what he wrote. Can you count on him to do that? She was quiet for a moment. I don't know, she said. He's my brother, and I love him, and he has let me down in more ways than I can count, and I genuinely do not know. She paused. But I talked to him this evening before supper, and he looked like a man who has decided something. I don't know what he decided. I'm hoping it's the right thing. Caleb looked at her. And if it isn't, then we use the documents alone, she said. The documents stand without him. Thomas's testimony makes it cleaner. The documents make it true. The kettle whistled. She made the tea and set his cup in front of him, fresh hot, and sat back down. There's one more thing, she said. Tell me. I've prepared a summary page for each council member. I intend to put them on the chairs before the meeting opens. She watched his face. I didn't ask you about it first. He looked at her. What does it say? The same things we've been saying for 2 weeks in one page in language that a man who's been sitting on this council for 3 years and hasn't thought hard about property law can understand in 5 minutes. She paused. It puts everything in front of them before Briggs opens his mouth, so his version isn't the first version they hear. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, when were you planning to tell me? Tomorrow morning, she said, before we left. You were going to do it regardless of what I said. She met his eyes. Yes, she said, but I would have told you first. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face, and it was not anger, she was certain of that, but it was something serious and considered. Maribel, he said, this is my ranch. I know it is, she said, and you have been fighting for it like it's yours. She held very still. I'm not saying that as a complaint, he said. I'm saying it because I need you to understand that I see it. I see what you've done, and I see what it cost you to do it, and I see that you did it while also carrying everything else you came here carrying. He stopped. He looked at his cup. I don't have the words for what that means to me. I have never been a man with the right words. Caleb, let me finish, he said. I've been careful with you because you asked me to be. You said, ask me again when this is over. I've been waiting. He looked up. Tomorrow is the meeting. The day after is over. And I am telling you now that the minute it is over, I am going to ask you. His jaw set. I need you to know that. So that tonight you know there is something on the other side of tomorrow. Something worth getting through to. The kitchen was very quiet. Maribel looked at this man. This careful, contained, deeply decent man who had pulled up his horse in a dark street and asked if she was all right, and meant it, who had said it's not charity, it's a job, because he had understood that the distinction mattered, who had sat at a table with his father every morning for 6 weeks, without remarking on the miracle of it, and she felt something large and clear and certain settle in her chest. I know, she said softly. I've known for a while. He exhaled, long and quiet. Good, he said. She picked up her tea. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow's going to be long. Yes, ma'am, he said. And there finally fully was the smile. Small and brief and entirely real. She went back to bed and slept. Thursday came cold and bright. Maribel was dressed before sunrise, the summary pages folded and counted in her coat pocket, the metal box with the documents on the kitchen table, Thomas's written account on top. Thomas came downstairs at 7, looking like a man who had made a decision in the night and was not sure it was the right one and had decided to act on it anyway, which Maribel recognized as the best version of Thomas she had ever seen. I'll say it out loud, he said at the breakfast table. If it comes to that, I'll stand up and say it in front of whoever is in that room. Maribel looked at him. Are you sure? No, he said. But I'm going to do it anyway. She nodded. Then eat your breakfast, she said. You'll need it. Silas ate his breakfast without being asked, which he had done every day for 6 weeks now, and when he was done, he stood up and got his coat. Papa, Caleb said, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, Silas said. I was at that land office in 1871, and I am going to be in that council room tonight, and that's the end of it. Caleb looked at Maribel. She looked back at him. That's the end of it, she agreed. They arrived at the Willow Bend meeting hall 40 minutes before the session opened. The hall was a plain room with rows of wooden chairs and a table at the front where the council members sat. Maribel walked down the center aisle and placed a summary page on each council chair with the same calm efficiency she used to set a table for supper. 7 chairs, 7 pages, face down. Caleb watched her do it from the back of the room. Roy Weston, who had come early, watched from the side wall with an expression of quiet approval. By the time the meeting was set to open, the room was full. 6 ranch families, Clara Weston and 4 other women from town. Hester Caulfield in the 3rd row with her husband and 2 grown sons. Garrett in the back, arms crossed, watching the door. And behind them, the ordinary residents of Willow Bend who had come because the word was out that something was going to happen tonight, and nobody in a small town missed something happening. Harlan Briggs arrived and saw the room and stopped just inside the door. Maribel watched his face move through the calculation. The count of the bodies, the recognition of the families, the summary pages already on the council chairs. She watched him find her in the crowd and hold her gaze for a moment, and she held it back without any expression at all. He moved to his seat. Beside him a moment later came Walter Pike. Walter Pike, who had married Dora Haynes for water rights and land access. Walter Pike, who had taken Thomas's arrangement and built a scheme on it. Walter Pike, who had written, "Come West Maribel. I have built something here," and had meant every word of it, just not in the direction she had believed. He did not look at her. She noticed that he did not look at her. The council chairman called the meeting to order and asked for the summary pages to be turned over. She heard the rustle of 7 pages being lifted and turned, and then she heard the particular silence of people reading something that changes the shape of what they thought they were attending. Briggs leaned forward. "Mr. Chairman." "Give us a moment, Harlan," the chairman said without looking up from his page. Briggs sat back. Roy Weston, at the far end of the council table, read his page twice. He looked at Maribel. He gave a small, deliberate nod. The chairman set his page down. "Mr. Briggs," he said, "I'd like to understand this proposed reassessment before we vote on funding. Specifically, I'd like to understand why the Rusk deed was removed from county records in January, and what that removal has to do with your petition." The room shifted. 20 people leaning forward at once. Briggs said, "I don't know anything about a removed deed." "You don't," the chairman said. "No, sir." Maribel stood up. Every head in the room turned. "My name is Maribel Bell," she said. Her voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. "I am the housekeeper at the Rusk Ranch, and I have been managing the documentary case for Mr. Rusk's property rights for the past several weeks. I would like to present to this council the federal territorial grant for the Rusk property, dated June 1870, certified by the federal land agent in Millhaven, along with the county clerk's filing receipt for the deed that was subsequently removed from county records, and a signed and witnessed account of the business arrangement between Harlan Briggs, Walter Pike, and Thomas Bell that forms the context for this evening's petition." Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Then Briggs said loudly, "This woman has no standing in this proceeding." "This woman," Roy Weston said from the council table, in a voice that was quiet and final, "has more standing than anyone in this room because she is the one who actually did the work." He looked at the chairman. "I move we hear the documents." "Seconded," said Alderman Patterson. The chairman looked at Briggs. Then he looked at Maribel. "Miss Bell," he said, "please come forward." She walked to the front of the room. She placed the certified federal grant on the table. She placed the receipt beside it. She placed Thomas's written account, 4 pages signed, witnessed beside that. And then she stood back and let the document speak. Thomas in the 3rd row stood up without being asked. "My name is Thomas Bell," he said. His voice shook slightly at the start and steadied. "I am Maribel Bell's brother. I have a written account in front of this council that I am prepared to confirm verbally. Every statement in those 4 pages is accurate. I was party to the arrangement described. I am prepared to answer questions." Walter Pike at the side of the room stood up very fast and said, "This is absurd." "Mr. Pike," the chairman said. "Sit. Down." Pike sat down. Briggs said nothing. He was looking at the 4 pages on the table in front of the chairman, and his face had the look of a man watching something he built fall down, and knowing there is nothing left to do but watch. Maribel stood at the front of the room, and she breathed. She had sold her good winter coat. She had spent 37 cents and slept in a strange room with a lock on the door and cooked stew with sage she hadn't known was Eleanor's. She had written letters and ridden to 5 ranches and sat across from her brother while he confessed what he had done and had not cried or screamed or said any of the things that had been living in her chest for 6 weeks. She had done all of that, and now she was standing in front of this town, and they were all looking at her, and not one of them. Not one was looking at the large woman who had arrived on the stage with a carpet bag and nowhere to go. They were looking at the woman who had just changed everything. The chairman said, "Miss Bell, would you like to walk us through these documents from the beginning?" She put her hands flat on the table. She looked at the room. She found Caleb's eyes in the crowd steady, certain proud in a way he didn't try to hide, and she held them for exactly 1 second. Then she looked at the chairman. She walked the council through every document for 45 minutes, and nobody left the room. That was the thing she noticed most. Not the silence, not the weight of 20 people listening. Not Briggs's face going progressively more rigid beside Walter Pike's increasingly pale one, but the fact that not a single person in that room got up and walked out. They stayed. Every ranch wife, every landowner, every ordinary resident of Willow Bend who had come because they heard something was happening, they stayed and they listened, and they watched Maribel Bell stand at the front of their town and dismantle a 2-year scheme 1 document at a time. She presented the federal grant first. She explained what a territorial grant was, what authority it carried, why no county-level reassessment could override it without federal authorization that did not exist and had not been sought. She used plain language because the council members were not lawyers, and neither was she, and plain language was more dangerous than legal language in a room like this because everyone understood it and no one could pretend otherwise. Then she presented the receipt. This receipt, she said, is dated March 14, 1871. It is a county clerk's acknowledgement of deed filing for the Rusk North Pasture property. The deed it acknowledges is no longer in county records. She paused. It did not disappear on its own. The chairman looked at Alderman Cole, who was sitting at the far end of the council table and had not said one word since the meeting opened. Cole's face was the color of old tallow. "Alderman Cole," the chairman said, "do you have any knowledge of how that deed came to be absent from the county archive?" Cole said, "I want to speak with an attorney before I answer any questions." The room erupted, not loudly, not the way crowds erupt in anger, but in the particular way of people who have just heard a man confirm by refusing to deny it everything they had suspected. Hester Caulfield said something quietly to her husband that made him nod once hard. Garrett in the back uncrossed his arms. Roy Whiston leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, like a man cataloging everything he should have seen sooner. Briggs stood up. "This entire presentation," he said in the voice he used when he was accustomed to being the largest thing in a room, "is based on documents prepared by a woman with no legal training supported by the testimony of a man who has admitted to participating in a fraudulent arrangement and designed to discredit a legitimate petition that has been properly filed with this council. I move that we table the reassessment vote until this matter can be reviewed by a qualified." "The petition is withdrawn," Walter Pike said. Every head turned. Pike was on his feet. He was not looking at Briggs. He was looking at the table in front of him with the expression of a man who has just calculated the distance between where he is standing and the edge and has decided that jumping is preferable to being pushed. "I withdraw my support for the reassessment petition," he said, "effective immediately." Briggs turned to look at him. The look on Briggs's face was something Maribel thought she would remember for a long time, not anger, not yet, but the particular expression of a man who has just been abandoned by the person he counted on, and is very rapidly understanding what that means. "Walter," Briggs said, very quietly, like a warning. "It's over, Harlan," Pike said. He still wasn't looking at him. "It was over when she walked up to that table," the chairman said, The petition having been withdrawn by one of its primary sponsors, and given the evidentiary questions raised this evening regarding county record integrity, I am suspending any further action on the reassessment proposal pending a formal inquiry into the missing deed. He looked at Cole. Alderman Cole, I am requesting your voluntary recusal from this council pending that inquiry. If you decline, I will call a removal vote tonight. Cole said, I recuse myself. And just like that, it was done. Not with a bang, not with a dramatic pronouncement. With a county alderman saying 3 words into a quiet room, and the sound of 20 people understanding simultaneously that something that had been running for 2 years had just stopped. Maribel picked up her documents from the table. She aligned them carefully at the edges. She put them back in the metal box and closed the latch. The meeting was formally adjourned 8 minutes later. What happened after that was not orderly. People do not move in an orderly way when something significant has just shifted under them, and the residents of Willow Bend were no exception. There was movement and conversation, and the sound of chairs scraping and voices rising, and through all of it, Maribel stood at the front of the room and waited, because she had learned long ago that the person who moves first after something like this moves into chaos, and she had had enough chaos for 1 year. Hester Caulfield reached her first. She came down the center aisle with her hand already extended, and she took Maribel's hand in both of hers and said, My husband lost 40 head of cattle 3 years ago because of what Cole did. We never knew. We just thought it was bad luck. She stopped. Thank you. I'm sorry it took this long, Maribel said. It took as long as it took, Hester said. You got here when you got here. Garrett came next, hat in hand, literally, physically, holding his hat in front of him, and said, Miss Bell, I owe you an apology for the way I spoke to you at my ranch. I was rude and I was wrong. You were cautious, she said. That's different. No, he said. I was rude and I was wrong. He looked at her steadily. I'm sorry. She held his gaze. Apology accepted, she said. Clara Weston came and stood beside her and did not say anything for a moment. Just stood there, and Maribel understood that as the most eloquent thing anyone had done all evening. Roy Weston shook Caleb's hand on the other side of the room, and Maribel watched Caleb's face while he did it, the careful, controlled relief of a man who has been holding a structure together through pure will and has just been told he can put it down. He looked across the room at her, and she gave him one small nod, and he gave it back, and that was enough. Thomas found her near the door. He looked like a man who had just done the most difficult thing he had ever done, and was not yet sure whether it had been enough. His hands were not quite steady. She noticed that, and did not comment on it. It's done, he said. Most of it, she said. He looked at her carefully. What's left? You and I, she said. That's what's left. But not tonight. She paused. Tonight, I want you to go back to Mrs. Holt's and sleep. Tomorrow morning, come to the ranch and we'll talk. Just us. No witnesses, no documents, no one listening. She looked at him. I have things to say to you that I've been not saying for 6 weeks, and you're going to hear all of them. And then we're going to decide what kind of relationship we have from here, if any. Thomas swallowed. All right, he said. Thomas. She stopped him before he turned away. You standing up in there tonight that mattered. I want you to know that it mattered. He looked at her for a moment. His jaw worked. It was the least I could do. Yes, she said. It was. But you did it anyway. He left. Briggs left the building 15 minutes into the aftermath without speaking to anyone, which was the loudest thing he could have done. She watched him go, and felt nothing particular, not satisfaction, not triumph, just the absence of the weight that had been sitting on the next 3 days, now lifted. Walter Pike left shortly after. He passed within 10 feet of where she was standing, and he stopped a brief hesitation, almost involuntary, and for a moment she thought he was going to say something to her. Something that might have been an apology, or might have been an explanation, or might have been neither and both. He didn't. He kept walking. She let him go. She had gotten every useful thing she was ever going to get from Walter Pike. And it had come from the documents, not from him, and that was the way she preferred it. By the time the room had mostly cleared, it was Caleb and Silas and Clara Weston and Maribel left, and Roy Weston speaking quietly to the chairman in the corner. Silas was sitting in a chair near the front, not because he was tired, his back was straight and his eyes were clear, but because he was the kind of man who sat down when the fighting was done, who took the moment seriously enough not to rush through it. Caleb came and stood beside Maribel. He didn't touch her. He just stood beside her and looked at the room the way you look at something when you're trying to make sure it's real. "It held," he said. "It held," she agreed. He turned to look at her. His face in the lamplight of the emptying room was open in a way she had only seen it in the kitchen at night, in the private hours, and she understood that he was not doing the careful thing right now. He was not being measured. He was just looking at her. "The ranch is safe," he said. "The ranch is safe," she said. "The documents are filed." "They are." "Briggs is finished." "He is." He was quiet for a moment. "I believe those were your conditions," he said. She looked at him. Something in her chest was large and warm and absolutely certain. "They were," she said. "Maribel Bell," he said. Not a preamble. Her name said the way a man says something he has been holding carefully for a long time and is finally ready to put down in the right place. "I would like to ask you something." "Ask me," she said. "Will you stay?" he said. "Not as my housekeeper, not as the woman who saved my ranch, though you did that, and I will never be able to say it right, but as—" He stopped. His jaw set. He tried again. "I am not a man who finds words easy. You know that by now. But I know what this house has been, and I know what it has been since you came, and those are two completely different things, and the difference is you." He looked at her steadily. "I want you to stay, because I love you. That's the whole of it. That's everything I know how to say." The room was very quiet. Silas from his chair did not look up, but the corner of his mouth moved. Clara Weston looked at the ceiling. Maribel looked at Caleb Rusk. This man who had pulled up his horse in a dark street and asked if she was all right, and meant it more than anyone had meant anything to her in years. And she thought about the woman who had sat on the edge of that sidewalk 6 weeks ago with 37 cents and a broken promise, and no idea what came next. That woman had been afraid. She had been exhausted and humiliated and completely alone, and she had told herself that someone was going to have to do something, because there was no one there but her. And she had been right, and she had done it. And somewhere in the doing of it, she had become without planning to a woman who had a place and a name and a home, and a man looking at her like she was the answer to something he'd been asking for 4 years. She had not come here for this, but here it was. "Yes," she said. Caleb exhaled that long, quiet breath she had come to know. "Yes," he repeated, like he was testing the word, making sure it was real. "Yes," she said again more firmly. "I'll stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Because this is where I want to be." She paused. "There's a difference." "You know there's a difference." "I know," he said. "That's why I waited." He put his hand out, not reaching for her offering, his palm up his arm extended patient. She looked at his hand. She thought about every hand that had been offered to her in her life, and what most of them had wanted from her. She thought about the hand she had steadied Silas with the first night, just a small support he'd accepted without comment. She thought about the hands that had written Thomas's letter, and Walter's letters, and the federal filing request, and 4 pages of testimony that had just ended 2 years of careful theft. These hands. Her hands. They had done all of that. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Warm. Certain a grip that was not possessive, but was absolute. And he did not move or speak for a moment, just held on like a man who has been looking for something in the dark for a very long time, and wants to stand still for a moment once he's found it. Silas said from his chair, "About time." Clara made a sound that was half laugh and half something more. Maribel felt something come loose in her chest that had been held tight for so long she had forgotten it was there, some braced, defended part of her that had been waiting for the moment when she would be found insufficient and asked to leave. It came loose and dissolved and left behind something clean and open that she did not yet have a word for, but recognized as the feeling of a person who has finally actually arrived somewhere. "Come home," Caleb said, quietly, just to her. "I am home," she said. They left the hall together, Caleb and Maribel and Silas, the old man between them, Roy and Clara Weston walking just behind with their hands linked and their voices low. The town of Willow Bend was quiet and cold and entirely itself, and Maribel Bell walked through the middle of it without looking at the church at the end of the street and without thinking about the carpet bag she'd arrived with, or the winter coat she'd sold, or the 37 cents that had been everything she had. She had done her accounting. She was done with it. The next morning, she met Thomas on the porch before breakfast. She had a cup of coffee, and she did not offer him one immediately, because she was not going to perform hospitality at the expense of honesty, and she had things to say. She said them. She told him what it had felt like to arrive in that town and understand in a general store what he had done. She told him about the 37 cents. She told him about the coat. She told him about sitting on the edge of the sidewalk and deciding that she was the only person who was going to help her, and what it had cost her to make peace with that. She told him all of it in a level voice, without crying, because she was done crying over things Thomas had done. But she told him everything, and she did not spare him any of it. And she watched it land on him, one piece at a time. When she was finished, the porch was quiet. Thomas said, "I don't have anything that makes it right." "No," she said. "You don't." "I can try to." "Thomas." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to make it right. I'm telling you what it was so that you know I know. All of it, every piece." She paused. "And I'm telling you that I am choosing to have a brother. That's a choice I'm making, not something you've earned. Do you understand the difference?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "I understand." "Good." She stood up. "Come have breakfast. Silas made biscuits this morning for the first time in 4 years, and they are not as good as mine, and I don't intend to tell him that." Thomas looked at her, this woman who had arrived with nothing and built something out of it that he had not had the imagination to anticipate, and something moved across his face that was not quite admiration and not quite shame, but contained both. He followed her inside. Silas had indeed made biscuits. They were slightly too dense, and one side was more brown than the other, and Caleb had eaten 2 of them with the careful diplomacy of a man who loves his father and knows what the gesture means. Maribel sat down and took one and ate it and said, "Silas, these are good, because they were good enough, and because the man at the table who was eating his own cooking for the first time in years deserved to hear it." Silas looked at her over his coffee cup. "You don't have to say that." "I know," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true." He looked at his biscuit. "Eleanor's were better," he said. "Probably," Maribel said. "Mine are better than yours. We all have our place in the order of things." Silas laughed. An actual laugh, sudden and real, the kind that surprised him as much as anyone in the room. Caleb looked at his father's face, and then looked at Maribel with an expression she recognized as the one he got when something cost him nothing to feel, and he let himself feel it anyway. Thomas ate his biscuit quietly and did not say much, and that was right. 3 weeks later, the formal inquiry from the territorial governor's office arrived in Willow Bend. It was addressed to the county chairman, and it requested a full accounting of county clerk activities for the past 3 years, with particular attention to deed filings and any alterations to existing records. Cole had already quietly left town by then, packed his things, and gone east without announcement, which was confirmation enough for anyone who needed it. The inquiry named Harlan Briggs specifically. It named Walter Pike. It referenced in dry official language a fraudulent property arrangement facilitated through misrepresentation of a third-party language that meant Thomas, that meant Maribel, that meant the whole chain of it, and it requested that all parties named make themselves available for questioning. Briggs hired a lawyer from Helena. Pike cooperated with the inquiry immediately, which surprised no one who had watched his face in the council meeting. The lawyer from Helena came and went, and the inquiry ground through its bureaucratic process the way such things do, slowly and thoroughly. And at the end of it, Briggs was assessed significant financial penalties and barred from serving on any county body, and the land that had been transferred to Thomas through Pike was formally marked as obtained through fraud, and its status referred to a federal adjudicator. Thomas came to Maribel when the adjudicator's letter arrived. "The 20 acres," he said. "They're going to be reclaimed." "Yes," she said. "That was always going to happen." "I know." He looked at her. "I wanted to tell you first." She nodded. "Thank you for that." He turned the letter over in his hands. "I'm going back to Pennsylvania," he said. "I think that's the right thing." "I think so too," she said. "Will you?" He stopped. "I'd like to write, if that's acceptable." She looked at him for a moment. "Right," she said. "I'll write back. We'll see where it goes." He left the following week. He shook Caleb's hand at the wagon, and Caleb shook back without warmth, but without coldness either, which was the correct amount of both. He hugged Maribel briefly, and she let him, and when he climbed up onto the wagon and looked back once before the road took him, she raised her hand. That was enough. It was October again by the time everything was fully settled. A full year since she had stepped off a stagecoach with a carpet bag and a letter and 37 cents. The inquiry was closed. The documents were all filed in the right places. The Rusk North pasture was legally and permanently established as Rusk land, with federal backing that no county official could touch. Roy Weston had been elected to fill Cole's council seat, which everyone agreed was the obvious outcome, and which Roy accepted with the resigned air of a fair man who keeps being asked to do things because he is the only one around who will do them right. Clara Weston had become in the course of everything the closest friend Maribel had ever had. They had coffee on Thursday mornings, alternating between the ranch and the Weston homestead, and they talked the way women talk when they have stopped performing and started being honest, which is one of the rarest and best things available to a person in this life. The ranch ran well that fall. The creek access held the herd came through summer grazing in good condition, and Silas, who had not been to the north pasture in 2 years, rode out with Caleb one morning in September and came back looking like a man who had reclaimed something he'd thought was gone. He told Maribel about it at supper that evening. "The grass is good up there," he said. "Eleanor used to say the north pasture was where the ranch actually breathed. She was right." He paused. "She usually was." "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman," Maribel said. "She was," Silas said. He looked at her across the table. "So are you. Different, but the same kind of different, if you follow me." Caleb beside her said nothing, but his hand found hers under the table just briefly, just for a moment, and she let it stay. That evening after supper, after Silas had gone to bed, they sat at the kitchen table with their tea, the way they had done every night for a year, and Caleb said, "There's something I want to ask you." "You've already asked me," she said. "A different question," he said. She looked at him. His jaw was set in that familiar way that meant he was working toward something, and his hands were around his cup, and he was looking at the table rather than at her, which meant the words were costing him, and he was paying them anyway. "Maribel Bell," he said. He looked up. "Will you marry me?" Not a question with a question mark at the end. A statement. A thing he was putting down on the table between them, solid and certain, the way he put everything down when he'd made up his mind. She looked at him. She thought about the sidewalk and the 37 cents and the letter in her coat pocket, and the first night she had stood at his stove and used sage she hadn't known was Eleanor's. She thought about the receipt in the tin box, and the summary pages on the council chairs, and the chairman saying, "Miss Bell, please come forward." She thought about Silas's laugh that morning, with the biscuits, sudden and real. She thought about this kitchen, this table, this man. "Yes," she said. "I will." He nodded once the way he nodded when something had been decided and needed no further ceremony, and she loved him for that. for not making it a performance, for understanding that she was not a woman who needed performance, for knowing, after a year of paying attention, exactly what she was and what she needed, and giving her exactly that. He reached into his vest pocket and set something on the table between them. A ring. Simple plain gold, no ornamentation. It had belonged to his mother. She knew that without being told. She picked it up and looked at it and then looked at him. "You've been carrying that for a while," she said. "Since the night of the council meeting," he said. She looked at the ring again. She thought about the ring Walter Pike had never given her. She thought about the letter. "Come West Maribel. I have built something here." She put the ring on her finger. It fit. She looked at Caleb, and he was watching her with that open expression, the one that cost him something to let through, and she did not look away from it, because she was done looking away from things that were good and real and hers. "You know," she said, "when I sat on that sidewalk a year ago and thought about what I was going to do next, I did not once think I will go to a ranch and make stew and dismantle a land fraud and fall in love with a man who uses 3 words when one will do." He almost smiled. "How's it working out?" She looked around the kitchen, this kitchen that had been empty and was now full, that had been cold and was now warm, that had been a place of survival and was now unmistakably, irrevocably a home. She looked at the man across the table, who had offered her work when she had nothing, and had meant every word of everything he had ever said to her, and had waited patiently and completely until she was ready to be chosen rather than desperate. She looked at the ring on her finger, plain and gold and real. "My name is safe here," she said. "For the first time in my life, my name is safe." And that was the whole of it. That was everything. A woman who had arrived with nothing had built something true, not because someone rescued her, but because she had refused even on the worst day of her life to stay down. She had fed a hungry house and fought for a stolen deed, and stood at the front of a room and told the truth, and when it was all done, and the dust had settled, and the documents were filed, and the land was safe, she had looked at the man who had pulled up his horse and asked if she was all right, and she had said yes. Not because she needed him, because she wanted him. And Maribel Bell, who had once had nowhere left to go, had found the only place she had ever needed to be.